Welcome to part 2 of getting into a residency. During this one, I'm going to talk about the all-important interview, thank you letters, and second looks. So residency interview. As I mentioned in part 1 of this presentation, once you get invited for a residency interview, you're basically a clean slate. You're on par with everybody else who is being interviewed. They've already narrowed down the focus. They think that your paper application looks good enough. So now is the time when you really need to shine. This is really a make it or break it moment. How do you hear about the interview in the first place? Usually you get an email or an ERAS notification. Then you call the program to set up the actual date for the interview. As I said in the first presentation, usually you hear about your interview around October through November. The interviews are usually happening November through January. Here I say interviews usually start around December, but there certainly are some programs that interview a little bit earlier. Setting up your interview. You want to make arrangements for your interview as early as possible. Remember, residency programs are interviewing a fairly large number of applicants. They've narrowed down the number of people who applied to their program quite a lot, but they're still interviewing quite a few people. So in order to get your most preferred date, you need to contact them back right away. Most program directors like to have the interviews done by January, so they have time to review and submit their rank list, which is usually done in January or in February. Ideally, you can schedule interviews for the programs that you are most interested in sometime in the middle of interview season. So if you are interviewing at 7 different programs, the ones that you're most interested in ideally would happen around your 3rd and 4th interviews. By then you'll have had some practice and you'll not yet be burned out and bored of interviewing, because trust me, that certainly happens. When you call back to schedule an interview, if it's a program that you're not all that familiar with, if it's not a place where you did an audition rotation or a sub-I, then you want to see if you can schedule an interview on a day when they have a morning rounds or a teaching conference so that you can get an idea of what their didactics are like. Planning for your interview. It's important that you are all aware that interviews are an all-day affair. They typically start around 8 in the morning and go all the way till 4 p.m. They are absolutely exhausting. You are smiling and putting forth a lot of effort to make sure that everybody knows what a fantastic candidate you are. For this reason, you want to avoid scheduling too many back-to-back interviews. And you also need to keep this in mind when you're arranging for travel. Don't plan to fly in the day of your interview. Plan to get there the night before. Have a way of getting from your hotel or wherever you're staying to the residency site. And then don't book a return flight home prior to 6 or 7 p.m. the night of the interview, just in case it runs a little bit longer or if it's far from the airport. Interview days usually involve a whole tour of the facility, a walking tour, a meeting with the program director, 1 or 2 individual interviews with attendings at the program, time with the residents to get to know them, and the opportunity to observe a didactic session. As I said, they are long all-day affairs and you're going to be walking a lot. I smile as my default expression, and even my cheeks were tired at the end of interview days. So expect that they're going to be really long days. Before your interview, make sure you review your materials. Make sure you know your application. Read through your personal statement again. Know what's in your CV. Be prepared to talk about any of that stuff. Prepare a list of questions that you want to have answered during your stay. Make sure that it's not something that you can find easily by researching the program online. And remember, you can always take your notes into the interview. Most applicants bring a pad folio, a little notebook type of a thing that's leather bound or pleather bound. They bring that in, and so you can certainly bring in questions with you. Before the interview, take a moment to be introspective. Distinguish yourself by showing that you know who you are and you know why you chose this particular residency program and this particular specialty. Everyone has a story, but many students we see don't seem as if they know their own particular stories. Many have not really thought through their lives and what they want. Make sure that is not describing you. Spend some time with yourself before the interview. So now is a great time, well before interview season even starts. Ask yourself what the expectations of your life will be like after residency. What's your visual image of your life as a doctor? What have you done that's shown that you're hardworking and dedicated? And what besides medicine are you passionate about? Make sure that you research the program before you show up there. Check to see if there are any graduates of your medical school there and see if you can contact them. So any Toro alums. Do research on the latest developments on the specialty that you're interested in. Know that different residency programs have different priorities. Some prioritize community involvement, whereas others prioritize research. Find out what that residency program prioritizes and think about how it matches with what you want. These are some of the places where you research the program, where you can look in to see what their board passage rates are, what other people think about them. Mock interviews. If I was able to, I would set up multiple mock interviews for all of our students. As I said, looking through that residency program director survey, every year we see how important the interview is and how many factors during the interview that residency program directors take into account when selecting who to choose for the residency program. So you really want to be able to nail your interview. Try to set up a mock interview. You can either do it with one of your faculty members or even with a trusted friend or family member. Dress and behave as you would during the real interview. So put on your interview suit. Make sure it feels real. Tape yourself, ideally audio and visually, during the interview, and then watch it afterwards. Any bad habits you have are going to jump out at you if you scratch your nose a lot or look down to the left a lot. Pay attention to nonverbal cues. Remember, the majority of our communication with other people are nonverbal. Look at your handshake, your tone of voice, your clarity, the pace of your speaking, your eye contact, your body language. How often are you smiling? Answer questions. You can absolutely take a breath before you answer, and you can even say, "That's a great question. Give me a moment to think about that." Take a nice deep breath, sending oxygen to your brain, and then think about how you're going to answer. Don't just start answering right away and hope that somehow you'll get to the point, because you'll come across as babbling. It's much better to take a moment than to give an answer that could potentially be damaging and not show you in the best light. What do you wear for an interview? Now more than ever is the time to dress conservatively. A conservative suit. Note that everybody wears a black suit. Men should wear ties with their suits, with a white blue shirt underneath, muted colors for women. East Coast interviews, remember that on the East Coast, things are that much more conservative than they are on the West Coast. So go ahead and choose that classic black suit. Women may opt for a skirt suit, no shorter than knee length, but once again, giving that ultra conservative feel. West Coast interviews, especially in California, you can go with a slightly different color, gray, blue, or brown. I wore a brown suit. This may let you stand out a little bit during interviews, but you don't want to stand out in a bad way. And here on the West Coast, women can wear pants. Feel free to wear pants. You certainly don't want to stand out, as I said, in a bad way. Nothing bright, nothing shiny, nothing sheer or minimal jewelry, conservative shoes. I'd say the most important thing about the shoes is that they're comfortable. Remember, you're doing a full walking tour of every hospital that you go to. So make sure your shoes are really comfortable. And then remember, some people are particularly sensitive to smells. So you certainly don't want to put on too much cologne or perfume or aftershave. You may even want to just not wear any of that stuff. Just make sure you're nice and clean and showered for your interview so that you don't smell bad or you don't overly smell in either direction. Ideally, you want to keep your hair off your face. For people who wear makeup, you want to keep it simple. People who have facial hair, you want to make sure it's well groomed. Your nails should be short and clean. Invest in a briefcase. I didn't do that, but I did have one of those pad folios. I have that picture up there. You don't want to be lugging around a backpack or a gym bag, anything that looks unprofessional. The nice thing about one of those pad folios or padded leather portfolio is that it gives you the opportunity to write down the names with the correct spellings of everybody that you meet. So the residents, everybody who does the interview with you, all of those things. And like I said, you can bring in a list of your questions. So if you happen to blank out when somebody asks, do you have any questions for us? You can look down at your list. The day before you interview, you want to make sure that your clothes are ready to wear. Make sure you bring an extra shirt and extra things just in case you spill or rip anything. And then remember, interview season is happening during the winter. So make sure that you have a really nice winter jacket. So something that you can wear in the rain that still looks nice. So not one of those fluorescent rain jackets like what I have for walking my dog. You actually want to invest in a nice professional rain jacket. Assemble your notepad, copies of your CV, extra pens, breath mints, whatever you want to bring with you. Confirm your interview time, review the directions to the interview location. Don't do anything that you don't normally do that could impair your performance. So don't drink any alcohol or take any drugs. If you are worried you're not going to be able to sleep, now is not the time to try out Ambien. You want to make sure that whatever you're doing the night before is something that you've done consistently in the past, and it's not going to impair your performance or your ability to get to your interview on time. You want to try to avoid anything that's going to be extra smelly the next day. Garlic, onions, whatever. If you do eat that stuff, just make sure that you brush your teeth really well. Don't overstudy your notes. Try to go to bed early. Try to get plenty of sleep. Interview day. In the morning, you want to give yourself plenty of time to get ready. You don't want to drink more caffeine than you usually do. So this I stole from somebody, and clearly I stole it from somebody who was lactose intolerant but maybe didn't realize it, because they have everywhere in here, don't drink milk or eat any dairy products. If you don't have any issue drinking milk or eating dairy products, then go ahead and do it. If you know it's going to make you extra gassy, then yeah, you probably want to avoid that. Plan to get to your interview at least 15 to 20 minutes early. Lunch. So remember, these interviews are spanning the whole day, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So lunch happens in there. For lunch, I say first date rules apply. So don't eat something that is too messy or too smelly, right? Even if they offer you alcohol, do not accept any alcohol during the lunch. No coffee or caffeinated tea. Unless you usually drink coffee or caffeinated tea at lunchtime, then go ahead. And no dairy, unless you don't have any issues with dairy, then go ahead. And certainly drink plenty of water, that's no problem. You don't want to overeat. You certainly don't want to be the interviewee in your interview group who has to unbutton the top of their pants because you ate a little bit too much at lunchtime. The post-interview reception. Now this was something that I only learned about once I started doing interviews, is that at most residency programs, the interns put together a little reception, a little get-together for everybody who's interviewing on that day to get together with the interns, whoever's not on call. This happens at a bar or it could happen at an intern's apartment. You get together, usually drinks are served. This person that I stole this list from says no alcohol even if it's offered. I don't necessarily agree with that. If you are somebody who does not drink, then absolutely, you don't have to do something that you wouldn't normally do. So you can tell them, no thank you, I don't drink, and drink non-alcoholic beverages. If you are somebody that does drink, it's absolutely okay to accept a drink. Just make sure you're limiting it to just one, right? We certainly had some people, some interviewees who came and overindulged that night. The post-interview reception is said to be off the record, but it's not. Everything gets back to the program director. So make sure that you don't let your guard down. You're still being judged there just as much as you are during the interview. The interns want you to party and to play with them and to relax with them. And you can certainly do that. Like I said, have one drink and then just nurse it for the whole time. Get to know them. But just make sure you're still keeping it on a somewhat professional level. First impression. You're likely going to be nervous, especially if it's your first interview or the program that you really, really want to get into. Don't forget the importance of a first impression. Be on time. Do not be the one interviewee who's running to catch up to the group, who's late, who has to try to find the group while they're on tour at the hospital. Get the names, including the spellings of the interviewers, so that you know who you're seeing and so you know who to address your thank you cards to. Make sure you're making really good eye contact. You're greeting everyone by name. You're offering your hand in a firm handshake. Remember, if somebody enters a room after you've already been in that room, you stand up and shake their hand, and then you wait for them to sit down before you sit down. All of those old-fashioned rules apply. And smile. Smile, smile, smile as often as you can. If you're offered coffee or tea but you don't feel like it, you're still pretty shaky, it is okay to say no thank you. And don't forget to breathe. Nice deep breaths. Send that oxygen to your brain. Go ahead and relax all of the hormones. Common interview questions. One of the most common interview questions that people have a hard time about is, tell me about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why have you chosen this specialty? These top 3 questions you should have really good, quick answers to. These should be things that are very easy for you to answer and to answer well. Why should we accept you into this specialty? Describe a patient who challenged you. So now is the time for you to start collecting stories about patients. I will say this. If you haven't had a lot of fantastic patient stories, but you know a friend that has, it would be okay to use your friend's patient story. Just make sure that you're making it believable, right? Now's not the time to make up something completely outrageous, but it's also not the time for you to say, oh, I haven't had any challenging patients, or I haven't had a particularly interesting patient. Hopefully, by this point in your 4th year, you certainly have had some of those patient experiences that really have spurred on your passion for whatever you're going into. If you have any leaves of absence, if you have any failing grades, if you failed a board exam or you have a really low board score, be prepared to explain it and try to explain it in a way that brings it positive. So if you have a low board score and somebody happens to ask you about it, then you can say, you know, unfortunately I wasn't able to perform at my usual level for that particular exam. X, Y, and Z happened. It taught me to be stronger and to be able to focus my efforts in these other areas. Like, whatever you can do, try to explain it in a more positive way. More common interview questions, and I'm not going to read through all of these. You guys can read through them on your own, but certainly read through them and try to come up with answers to them. Why are you interested in this program? Once again, this highlights the importance of you actually looking into the program ahead of time. What's the most interesting case that you've ever been involved in? Uncommon interview questions. How would you redesign the healthcare system? What's the one event that you're proudest of in your life? And then difficult questions. Some program directors think that by asking a difficult question, this is a way to see what you're like in a crisis situation. If you're asked something that seems really offbeat, you can probably count on the fact that you're being judged on your grace under pressure. They're not looking for you to give the right answer. They just want to see how you squirm in your seat. They want to see your ability to kind of think your way out of a difficult situation. And then remember, and you may remember this from medical school interviews, not all interviewers are equally skilled. You can correct some of the problems you encounter by keeping the interview focused. Avoid the tendency to over-answer, hoping to hit on something that your interviewer wants. So let's say you get an unskilled interviewer and they're just asking you questions that seem totally out of the blue and out of order, and you're trying your best to kind of focus them or trying to give them answers that they want. Don't worry about it too much. You can go ahead and assume that it's probably their problem and not yours. Just be friendly, be open, be honest. Do you have any questions? You're going to be asked this multiple times throughout the interview day. It's okay for you to say no most of the time, but when the program director asks, do you have any questions? You want to make sure you do have some questions for them. Always make sure the questions that you ask can't be easily answered by looking online, because that'll just make it look like you didn't do your research on their program. You want to direct each question to the appropriate interviewer. Think about your priorities and make sure you express them. You also want to ask your questions at appropriate times. So the very beginning of the interview is not the time to ask, so what's the salary like at this residency program? Remember to look at your tone and your word choice when you're asking questions. Some questions come across as confrontational when you don't mean them to be. So asking something like, what's wrong with your program? Versus, what are some of the challenges that I might face here? Or what are some aspects of your program that you might want to change and why? Look at each year of residency. It's very common that students are looking at the first year only, but it's important that you look at years 2, 3, and 4 as well. And don't try to buddy up with the faculty by telling them that you want to go into their subspecialty. So let's say you're interviewing in pediatrics and you have a pediatric cardiologist interview you and you have a pediatric hematologist oncologist interview you. You don't want to tell the cardiologist, I really want to go into peds cardio, and you don't want to tell the oncologist, I really want to go to peds oncology, because they're all going to get together and talk about you afterwards, and that's certainly going to be a red flag. Questions for you to ask. This is my go-to list. What changes do you expect to see in the residency program over the next 3 years here? Or if you're going to a 6-year residency program, over the next 6 years here. That's huge, and I certainly found out a lot of information about different residency programs by asking that question. That famous question that everybody likes to ask the applicants, your strengths and weaknesses, I like to throw it back at them. What are your program's biggest strengths? And what are your program's biggest weaknesses? Or what would you change about the program if you could, and why? What's your program's pass rate for the boards? Most residency programs will publish this information either online or you'll be able to find it on Frida. But if you can't find it, it's an important question to ask because it would be a red flag if a program had a low board passage rate. If you're interested in fellowship, ask, where do your residents go? What type of fellowships do they go into? What percentage of them go on for fellowship versus just staying in the general fields? Time spent with residents. The time you spend with the residents is usually said to be off the record. This happens during lunch, during the hospital tour, and during the post-interview reception. You're encouraged during this time to be very candid and ask any questions you have. But as I've mentioned before, you should remember that you're still interviewing. There are certainly some good questions to ask the residents. How many patients does a typical intern carry? What's a typical night on call like? How much support do you have during the difficult months? What are the chief residents like? I didn't realize how important chief residents were until I became an intern. So knowing what the chief residents are going to be like during your intern year is huge. How helpful are the didactics? Is the food free or do you have to pay for it? What's it like living in this area? These are some other questions you can look through and decide if they're questions that you want to ask. Interview no-nos. To come unprepared would be a no-no. To show up late. To tell inappropriate jokes. To not wear appropriate interview attire. To badmouth your school. So you will likely be asked, so what's Toro, California like anyway? And you may be feeling frustrated, especially by your 4th year, with some of the aspects of Toro, whether it's the student health or their ability to lose paperwork or whatever it is. I encourage you not to badmouth your school. It unfortunately makes you look bad. Right? It makes the program worry, well, if we were to accept this person, they're just going to badmouth our program. So you don't have to be dishonest and pretend like everything's perfect. But now is not the time to air your grievances. It's certainly not the place to air your grievances about your school. You can say something like, well, it has its issues, but the anatomy lab's really great, or whatever, and just leave it at that. Don't drink alcohol or smoke. Like I said, if you are a drinker and it's the post-interview reception, you can certainly accept a drink and then just nurse it. And you certainly don't want to lie. You don't want to get caught in a lie during any part of the interview, even the parts that are considered off record. After you interview, you should write thank you letters to the program director, to everyone who interviewed you, to the residents and interns that were particularly helpful. You should call the program director as it gets closer to time to submit your rank list. Let them know that their program is your #1 choice or one of your top choices. Ask if there's anything else that you can do to make yourself a better candidate. Remember that the programs are going to be doing the same thing. They may tell you, we're ranking you really high on our list, but you can't count on it, unfortunately. Make sure you still have backup options. I have heard multiple stories of students who were told by a residency program, we're going to rank you high on our list. So when match day came, they only ranked that one program because they counted on being able to match into that program, and then they didn't match into that program and they were forced to scramble. So nothing is official until match day, and unfortunately you can't count on anything like that. Thank you letters. Why should you write them? It gives you another chance to sell yourself to the program, helps them to remember you. You should spell the names correctly. Make sure that you write them down on interview day, look them up on the website. Keep it brief, but try to mention specific details about the program that interest you. The tone should be really enthusiastic. If you were asked about a particular book or something unusual, you talked about something different during the interview, then bring that up so that it'll help jar the person's memory. They'll help them to remember you better. And send it out within 2 weeks. These videos, I wish that I had the opportunity to embed them into this into this PowerPoint, but unfortunately I didn't. But you should watch both of them. They're great. The first one is much more serious. It gives you an idea from a program director's perspective of the important things to keep in mind when you're interviewing. I think it's like the top 10 ways to interview better or something along those lines. The second one is much more of a joke, but it's also pretty important for you to watch just to remind yourself that you're going to be burned out towards the end of interview season. After your 4th or 5th interview, you're going to be pretty burned out. Second looks. A second look is an additional visit to a program that you're interested in after you've already interviewed there. Not all programs offer second looks, but after you interview, if you didn't do a sub-internship or an audition rotation at a program, they may ask, do you want to come back for a second look? It's basically a day that you get to go and shadow the interns. You get to see if it's a good fit for you. You get to know a program a little bit better. Some people say that if you do a second look, it shows a program that you're really interested in them and it helps them to get to know you more. But that's what second looks are about. Second looks are much more for you. They're your opportunity to see a program and get to know them better. It certainly is not a make or break. If you don't do a second look, they're still going to rank you in the same place, whether you do a second look or whether you don't. But if you don't know, if you're trying to decide between a couple different programs and you don't know a program any particularly well, then you may choose to do it so you can see what the interns are like and what their team is like. What happens if you don't match? You enter into the Match Week Supplemental Offer and Acceptance Program. This used to be called the Scramble. It's now called the SOAP. It's a process through which positions offered by unfilled programs are accepted by unmatched applicants during Match Week. It's pretty nice because although the osteopathic match happens first and then the allopathic match happens, this SOAP or the Scramble happens at the same time. So if you don't match into an osteopathic program, you still have the opportunity to match into an allopathic program. If you don't match there, then you have the opportunity to scramble or participate in the SOAP so that you can match into either one, an osteopathic or an allopathic one. There's much more information here. These are all the same important resources. Those are some of the older program director surveys, the same applicant survey, personal statements, CVs, and interviews. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to contact me. Best of luck to you guys, and keep in touch. Let me know how things go. Thanks so much for listening.